Hey guys, Matt, IronTrap Garage. We're back working on the 34 Ford project. So now that I got the interior all cleaned out, we got it running, got the door jambs cleaned up, we're ready to start kind of putting things back together. And I've been working on just making a list and figuring out what I have from all the parts that when Pete and I cleaned out the car, we kind of just put everything in a box that I thought was for the car and good. And I'm going back now and seeing what am I missing, what do I have. Luckily the windshield frame was found by the family in the basement of the house, so we have that now. I cleaned it up already, it looks awesome, but I don't want to put the windshield in until we get a dash situation figured out. So we did find the glove box lid when we were searching through the car and a lot of the parts for the dash. We found some extra gauges that Larry had bought as replacements for the car that were probably a little bit better. But after talking to Barry Skelly on the phone that actually owned this car and did pretty much all the hot rodding to it for the most part, I learned that Barry was constantly evolving the cars. A lot of these hot rods that were drivers back in the day were doing, that he did things in sections as he had the money and whatever else. So he painted the car, then a later time he had it upholstered, a later time he had the engine and juice brakes done, and then did the wheels. So I kind of figured and thinking of what would have Barry done or what would have someone else like Larry might have done if they continued to modify the car and the car evolved and wasn't just put away and forgotten for all these years. So I already know that I was going to have to repaint the dash and the header panel because they were kind of beat up and banged up from being thrown around and moved around the garage for years at Larry's place. So I thought, why not take it a step further, put my little touch on it. So I dug through my parts bins or parts shelves, found this old Stewart Warner gauge panel that I had found at Hershey a few years ago, and I had a wood grain insert in it, but it was scratched, and I looked underneath and saw it was brass. So I stripped all the wood grain off and polished up the brass through a sort of matching set of gauges that are roughly from the era that this car was built. And what we're going to work on today is modifying the dash to fit this gauge panel in place. It actually sits really, really nice in the dash. I've already done a test fit, and we're going to just kind of put all the parts back together for the dash to figure out what I need, if I'm going to fill any holes or add any holes for switches or different things like that, so you can get it all laid out and prepped and ready so that I can repaint it in an upcoming episode. So I'm going to start working on making a pattern for this and seeing what we need to do to get it fitted to the dash. Alright, so I'm going to talk you guys through how I set up and tack weld a panel and get everything to make sure that it's straight and in its place as we're welding. So as I mentioned, I had the stitch weld magnets on here that kind of keep everything where it needs to go. And as we tack everything and work around, I'll basically start in one corner and just work my way around. If it's a straight weld we'll be doing, I'll work from the left and go over to the right, not jumping around, kind of just working my way across, and you can kind of work out any damage or any issues as you go. So I use these stitch weld magnets just to keep everything down where they need to go, and you'll notice I'll keep like 5 inches or so, or 6 inches, even sometimes more away as I go, just to make sure everything doesn't act funny with that. So make sure. So the whole time you're fighting the panel wanting to do weird stuff. So you want to make sure that the panel doesn't overlap and then it stays nice and flush. That's kind of the key. And these magnets kind of help with that, as long as you stay a little bit away from them. So I got pretty much everything flush there. I'm ready to go to the next weld. When I do the weld, I'll talk you through it. So I usually start my TIG welds on, especially on older metal. Now this dash isn't too bad, but sometimes you're welding on a car, the metal that might be pitted or thin from just previous people sanding and working on it. So generally what I do is I start on the fresh metal, because it's usually, even if it's thousandths in difference in thickness, it's just a little bit thicker, gives you a split second. So with my welder, I have a preset that I start at 10 amps. That's 10 amps, and then when I let off the trigger, it goes right to 40. And I start on the new metal, put a little blob of filler, and then I work over into the old metal. When I see it melt and flatten out together, and I let off, and I move along. So I usually do my tacks. That one was probably a little closer together than I normally do, but and I just check, make sure that nothing's like moving around on me, check around on the outside edge. It's not a big deal if something's moving a little bit over here, because we can address it as we go. Usually these tack welds will cause it to do weird stuff, so you can hammer and dolly the tacks a little bit if it's acting up. So I'll start on my old metal, new metal, and then slightly move over, let off the trigger to get to my 40 amps. Add some filler rod, let it blend in, let off. So I'm slowing it down a little bit. A lot of times I'm a little quicker with how I do that, but I wanted to show you guys how I dance around, move the puddle across. Checking here to make sure that we got good fit. Again, it's not lifting up on me or acting funny. We don't want to be forcing it into place. The magnets just hold everything flush. That's a little off there. Drop down just a little bit on me, and the gap's just a little tight there. So it's sitting a little low there. So if I weld that right now, it's going to be a problem from the rest of the time we're finishing it. So I need to hit the hammer and dolly and just tap it around a little bit just to get this surface leveled out. Then we can put a tack on it. It should be okay. We don't want to hammer and dolly real hard, because you'll actually stretch the weld seam and make it even tighter, and it's harder to get together. So I'm just going to tap it around lightly without stretching, just to get it to pop up, because I know that before it was fitting okay. I'm also going to hammer on these tack welds just a little bit to take the shrinking out of them, to kind of get back to zero, and that should also help that. It's probably, as I'm welding across here, it's shrinking the seam up, and it's gathering it together, which is why that's a little tight right there. So I have to stretch it out on the back side to give it some relief. Use a sandbag, since I don't have a helper, gives some weight so it doesn't flop around when I'm trying to hammer and dolly on it. So I'm just going to work my way backwards. So I'm not hitting real hard, as you can hear. I'm just tap, as soon as I start hearing a ringing, I stop. It flattens the TIG weld out, and that's all you really need to do. We didn't put a lot of heat into it, so you don't want to go swinging like you're driving a nail home, because you may actually overstretch the panel, which I've done a ton of times. That takes some touch, and I'm still learning it, to be honest. I'm not as good as a lot of these other guys, but I have to adjust as I go. My gap's just a tiny bit fat right here. When I was cutting this out, I think that's where I stopped my straight cut and then started cutting the corner with the saw, and I got a little fat there. That spot we know is going to be an issue. That's too much of a gap there, but we'll work around it. It'll just take some more hammer and dolly and repair work, but that happens. But everything else is moving as it should. So tack this corner in place so it doesn't wiggle around on me. Alright, so there it is, all tacked up. I'll give you guys a surface level view. You can see we don't got any crazy warping or anything weird going on. Only couple things I'm not happy about, and that's just me picking at myself. That little corner there is pretty big gap, but I can fill it. It's only in a small area. But along 90% of it, nice tight gap. I went ahead and hammered each of the welds. I don't know if I can get like a macro shot here, but you can see I knocked basically just a little head of the weld down. I used a radius hammer, so I was only hitting on the center of the weld and not damaging the area around it. Just a light radius hammer, and hammered along the edge. I got a little gap there too I'm not super happy with, but otherwise you can see the fit is really nice and tight. It's good. Nothing's sitting up high, the panel's not warped. Now it's going in the right direction, so all I have to do is just keep it under control. So as I weld it, hammer and dolly and adjust, same thing, keep an eye on it, and we should be able to get this to weld in and be fairly flat and not cause too much drama. Even though we're cutting a bunch of holes in this later on in the project, we want it to look good and not be all warped underneath of the panel. So there it is, all tacked in. And now I'm just gonna helmet down and try and weld through this thing in as close to 1 or 2 passes, probably 4 to be honest, maybe more, but we'll see. Alright, so here's a good example. You don't know what you're going to find. I saw there was some holes that were filled. You can see it right there, kind of cracking out. And there's one in this corner, and I didn't understand why this corner was popping on me when I was just welding through it. And I don't know if it's still hot enough yet, but there's lead in there. And just the heat of me welding was making the lead seep out and pop into my weld. That's why you can see all this white shit around it. So I got to melt that lead out before we get too crazy. I think I'm already past the point of welding near it, so the damage is done. Goodbye brain cells. But yeah, we're gonna need to melt that out before we do the body work on this thing and probably fill it correctly, but that's, you never know what you'll find. I thought maybe there was just body filler on it, but then again, the car was done so long ago. It makes sense it was leaded. So that corner is gonna cause me some work. You can see the heat affected zone is quite a bit bigger than the rest of it. Every time you see a little dip like that, you're going to have a weird spot that's going to be hard to get out because your heat zone isn't the same. Same with this corner, so I'm going to try and adjust this corner. I know this corner is going to fight me a bit. Perfect example is if your gap isn't quite right and then you add some lead into the mix, it causes problems. Alright, I turned the amperage up a little bit, and I have a 1/16 rod now instead of 0.35 just for this corner because I know I'm going to need some extra filler rod. I could probably do it with the 0.35, but I'm going to be shoving so much rod in. I decided to switch just for this corner. See how it treats me. Really shoving rod in now and weaving it back and forth to try and fill the gap. Woo! Got it. Alright. Take this right off the tripod and show you guys no trickery here. So this is what I did. I went to the 1/16 rod. You can see it's a big difference between the two of them. 0.35, 1/16 rod. I think this rod's considerably larger, as you can see, but I only used it for this corner. So starting with that little low spot right here is, or not low spot, but where the heat effective zone dips down, that's where we started. And I just added filler rod. I barely added any filler rod at the beginning because the gap wasn't very big. And then in the center, I was just shoving rod in to kind of get it. And I can't stress enough for sheet metal work like this, you're not trying to lay a stack of dimes like you're welding a stainless exhaust or something that's you're going to see. So I just tried to fill it and shove it in, and we got it in there pretty good. Obviously the seam's filled, which I'm happy with. I'm sure on the back side it's completely filled. So now we just have this little section here. I think that little gap I could probably take care of with the 0.35 rod. But you can see that's how I handle those gaps. You got to be quick. You got to run it a little hotter, and you got to just fill rod in and kind of run over it and weave. But we're good. So we're on the home stretch. I'm going to actually hammer and dolly this a little bit just to adjust it, keep it under control, and then I'm going to weld this last corner, try and get it in one shot, and then we're on the home stretch for welding this little piece here. Woo! I realized probably 2 seconds into welding, forgot to turn the welder down. We were 5 amps higher than I was welding the rest of this with the 0.35 rod, and you got to move a ton quicker and add a lot more filler rod. So that was, when I got into that corner, I was a little scared because I really had to haul ass and shove filler rod in. It should work out just fine. It's just you have to adjust on the fly, and that's all. When you're welding stuff this thin, that's all it takes. 5 amps can be the difference between comfort and blowing through and going faster than you're used to. But we worked it out. That was easy. Just leaded the patch in. Ah, look at that. One more here somewhere. There we go. Easy does it. Alright, so I test fit the dash in the car with just the insert here mounted. I got the mounting bolts in the back, just hand tight. Wanted to make sure I liked how it looked. It didn't look funny once it was in the car. I always like to test fit this stuff and just make sure that it doesn't like look funny in the car. It might look good on the bench and then you put it in the car and you're like, what the hell? But no, it looks pretty good. We're gonna take this insert back out here just so we don't scratch it up. And what we need to do now is just basically start punching these holes for the gauges. And so I like where they're at here, so I'm going to trace the opening out. And they got these little notches for the gauges, obviously, at the bottom. So I'm going to trace those out. And then we got to see if I got hole punches to match this. From memory, I should have something pretty darn close that'll work out for us. Let's get to cutting some holes and hopefully finishing this thing up. Alright, so dash is mounted. That was a project that took, probably took a full day's work, if not a little more, but definitely a full day's work between marking everything out, cutting the old piece out, making a new panel, finding the lead, and on and on and on. It took quite a while to get it to this stage, which isn't even ready for paint yet. But the important thing is it looks freaking awesome. I'm super psyched on it. The brass insert really pops with the rest of the interior. I think it's kind of a neat little contrast to all the white and chrome and black that's on the car. I mounted the gauges up and mounted the gauge panel and the dash and everything. I wanted to mount it up fully as if it was ready to go in the car before we do any body work or painting, because I wanted to just make sure that everything fit okay. We didn't have any issues mounting it in the car, and overall it seems fine. It really seems like it will flow really good, and I'm psyched on how it turned out. So now what I need to do next time for the next portion of this video, what we'll do is I'm going to take the gauge panel out. Obviously I need to just do a little bit of body work around the weld seam. I just need to put like a glazing putty over the weld seam to just fill any of those little pits or inconsistencies in the weld that I didn't take the time to like get the bullseye pick out and fix every one. Just cover that up a little bit, and I also need to dig and see if I can find the glove box the ashtray cover. I have a bad feeling that I don't have it. If so, I'm gonna have to just continue forward without it right now. But my goal for the next video is to get this thing all sanded down, make sure there's no other hidden surprises or lead that's in this, down to basically bare metal, fix any minor issues that are in the dash, make sure I pick out any holes and what I'm going to do with the extra holes in the dash, and then start doing a little bit of body work, and then we're going to paint it. I picked a 60s GM, I think it's polar white. It was called a couple of things, but it was like a 60s Corvette color, which I thought, since the body was a Corvette red, I'd do like a Corvette or GM white for this, the polar white. I'm going to be doing this, the header panel for right now, and then eventually I'll probably be doing the garnish moldings, but I figured I might as well just pick one paint, stick with it to do all the stuff that's white, because as it is right now, the whites don't really match on the different parts super well, so I think I want to do that. So next time will be body work and spraying and all that type of stuff, but for right now, I'm going to sit in the car and stare at it with the gauges and a dash in it, and just get excited for driving the thing. So thank you guys for watching. I appreciate you guys following along as always. We do videos on Tuesdays, Fridays, and Sundays. Thanks, guys. Catch you later.